interview, we'll ask our friends from Shakespeare Exchange. That is Cristina and Liz. We'll see if we can ask them to join us. Now this is new for me, so let's see if we can make this work. I'll send a request to Cristina first, and once she joins us, this is Cristina Lundy from the Shakespeare Exchange, and they just wrapped up last night. Hello, Cristina.
Hi, how are you doing? Let's see if we can get Liz in here.
Let's see if I can make that happen now. Let's see if I can make that. I think we can. Let's see, invite to join, invite. Let's see if that works.
Come on.
Oh,
Yay!
we did it! Hooray! Thank you, technology. The latest update to Instagram. All right, so we have our friends Cristina Lundy and Liz Thaler from the Shakespeare Exchange. Now, before we get into your show, you just wrapped up The Winter's Tale last night. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Shakespeare Exchange, how long you folks have been around, where you're mostly focused. I know you do the ShakesBEER events, which are like walking tours with beer that go around downtown, and you interject some Shakespeare to them. That sounds just fantastic. But tell me a little bit more about what the Shakespeare Exchange is all about.
Sure. So the company was founded by Ross Williams, my co-artistic director, in 2010, I believe. The first show was done in 2010. And then I joined as associate artistic director in 2011. That was also the year of our first pub crawl. And our programming has really expanded in the year since then. I became co-artistic director in the beginning of 2020, and at the same time as we brought on a new kind of producing programming cohort that Liz is a member of called the Leadership Council. That was a move to also broaden the perspectives that steer our programming past just that of myself and Ross as the only ones who are thinking of what we could possibly do. Mm-hmm. And so when we get to any talking about Winter's Tale, I would love to just throw to Liz, because this was a project that was brought up directly by Liz and another council member, Sam, as just the specific show at the specific time that they wanted to try to dip our toe back into live theater. But the pub crawls that we love, that we can't wait to get back into bars live to be able to do that whenever we can safely feel like we can do that. Because the fun of that is really being in a crowd, breathing all over each other, sometimes spitting beer over each other, sometimes climbing on top of each other. So not the most COVID safe, but we're keeping our fingers crossed that will come back soon. But we also, starting in 2013, we launched the Sonnet Project, which is a film anthology project where we invite filmmakers to make a film based on one of the sonnets. And right now we are about 135 deep into the New York one. And a couple of years ago, we set the dial back to 0 and launched a US one and an international one. So we're hoping to kind of do second and third sets of that. We also, in 2018, we started a series with the New York Public Library at 53rd Street called the Freestyle Labs, where we use Shakespeare as a jumping off point or a lens to speak about other topics. We've talked about immigration, Shakespeare translated into other languages, Shakespeare in comic books, Shakespeare and trans identity and trans warriors in the military. And that particular project, then so to go back to the beginning of COVID, this leadership council that I'm talking about, we had an in-person 2-day retreat the weekend before the week that things started to shut down in New York.
Oh, goodness gracious.
And we had whiteboards full of like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to have like events to raise funds and do all these kinds of things. And then we took a couple months to just get all of our bearings with life and sickness and happening to various ones of us at the time. And then started reconnecting to each other and seeing like, what could we possibly do, and dipped a little bit of a toe into virtual readings and projects, but didn't go as fully into that as some other companies really did over the course of 2020. But in almost a year to the week later, in March of 2021, we had a reconvening of the Leadership Council, and again, 2 days, this time with a couple weeks in between, to just throw a bunch of ideas on the table. And we had earlier in the summer, we did a virtual version of the freestyle lab that I talked about, where we talked about trauma in Shakespeare.
Hmm.
We are planning another one for possibly in the next month or so, talking about the Polynesian American experience and migration narratives and oral tradition and relationship with Shakespeare. And later on, at some point, possibly after the new year, we're trying to do one that will hopefully be an in-person freestyle lab on ASL and deaf performers and sign language in Shakespeare. But Winter's Tale grew out of a desire to say, can we do it live? Because as much as the virtual projects have given us a lot of wonderful discoveries, there is something you just really miss about the live experience. So we said, how can we do it safely? What can we do? And we started talking and moving towards like, well, outdoor right now feels more doable if we're building a runway towards planning something over the course of many months. And then as far as show choice, it was Winter's Tale from the beginning for Sam and the producer, or Sam the producer and Liz the director. And so I am certainly ready to throw it to Liz to talk about why that particular show.
Yeah,
If you
Liz,
don't have any other
sure. Yeah,
questions right now.
let's throw it to Liz. That Liz, absolutely. That Winter's Tale. I mean, it's a fantastic show, but it's not. It's not the when you ask someone, well, hey, what Shakespeare are you producing? Usually, Winter's Tale is not the first one that jumps out of people's mouths. So, what made you decide about on the Winter's Tale?
And that's actually one of the things. First of all, can you hear me? Do I sound all right?
Yeah, hear you just fine.
Can you hear me? Great. What's cool about
Thumbs up.
it
Yeah, I hear you just fine.
is even even if you're a Shakespeare theater goer, some people have seen it a bunch, and some people really are not that familiar with it. It's kind of in that gray area of, is it an obscure play or is it a beloved classic? For me, it's a beloved classic. I've actually seen it many times. I wrote a play about it. I've read books inspired by it. It's one of my longtime favorites. And I think a lot of the people in our cast, some knew it better than others. A lot of people who saw it, it was their first time seeing it. But for me, now was the perfect time. And I've seen wonderful productions of it. There might have been another time where I would have said, I don't know if I need to direct this right now. I saw Aaron Arbus's at Theater for a New Audience, and that was so wonderful. Maybe we don't need Liz Thaler's right now, except that coming into this historical moment for America, just the themes of this nation that has caused trauma to itself and now has to find a way to recover and has to find a way to forgive itself and each other for unforgivable things, that resonated really strongly for me.
What a great through line. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And, Sicilia is a traumatized nation, and it's the king's fault. And the king is a traumatized person, and he did it to himself. And the queen is extremely traumatized, and their daughter is traumatized, and they have to decide what they want to do about that at the end. And the ending is, difficult for a lot of people, and particularly modern audiences. I think perhaps for Shakespeare's audience as well. I don't think it was necessarily supposed to be a smooth, comedic, happy ending, but it's messy, and that's what I like about it, because if we manage to scratch out some sort of happy ending for ourselves, it's not going to be a clean one. There are no clean happy endings for us sometimes when we have done things we can't take back. And that's something, the weirdness of the play is very honest to me. Right. So that I found immediately appealing for now.
So Cristina was mentioning in the beginning of this interview that you guys have so many different things that you're exploring between the Sonnet Project and between the cohorts and the pub crawls, and all the different things that you're doing to engage New Yorkers, engage audience, engage the larger, not just the theatrical audience, but in general the audience here in New York in different kind of Shakespearean adventures. So you're back on the stage, you're back with the Winter's Tale. And it's as Christina mentioned, it's a long time coming because you're away, you're doing in the virtual realm, and you're back on the stage. You just wrapped up your run this past weekend. What was it like getting back in that theater, getting with the live audience to interact with your show? What was the feedback like?
The feedback was great. I think the audiences were the easiest part of the whole thing, honestly.
Yeah, I mean,
In
you
what
say
way?
back in the theater. We were not back in a theater. We were outdoors. And we were outdoors for quite a bit of the rehearsal process too, because we felt it was the safest way it could be conducted with regards to COVID. I mean, we did have a COVID safety manager as part of the production staff, and we went through a whole process of drafting and revising protocols for COVID safety and testing and symptom checks and everything. And it turned out we were trying to brainstorm possible outdoor places to rehearse when the weather would allow it. And through a couple of trial and errors, the location that I know they ended up using more than anything, I think couldn't be more perfect and gets my heart, because they were rehearsing in Central Park in view of Belvedere Castle in the back of the Delacorte Theater.
Wow,
There's
fantastic.
also public restrooms happen to be pretty close if you're close to the Delacorte. But I personally, my kind of other life in my career is I support myself doing wardrobe work for theater. And I worked at the Delacorte many years at the beginning of my time in New York. And so when I went to kind of scout the location late one night with the stage manager, and I turn around and there's the castle, and I'm like, oh God, if you guys could just rehearse it here, I think that would be some good karma.
So it was an outdoor venue. Where was the show performed?
We
In
did it
two
up,
different locations. Go ahead.
yeah, up in Woodhill Park, at the top of Manhattan,
Hmm.
on the Hudson River, and then in Pier 46, which is just north of the Christopher Street Pier, which is Pier 45, also on the Hudson River, just at the opposite end of Manhattan. And so the sunset in both
Right.
locations.
Yeah, two little
Okay. All
peninsulas
right.
on
So
the
that
water on the sunset.
in the past several months, something that I've gotten the vibe from different people we've spoken to here in the different programs that we do is that audiences coming back to see live performances, at least thus far, have been more ready to come to outdoor venues where there isn't as much of a concern about COVID safety, as opposed to an indoor venue where there's there's obviously not as much air circulation. There's more concern about sitting in closer proximity to people. So you were outdoors. So that did that alleviate the concern about COVID, or you mentioned you had a COVID expert that was there to give you guidelines. So what were your protocols that you followed?
That was for actors and crew, the whole cast and production crew, because the actors were performing unmasked and rehearsing unmasked when outdoors. And so we put in place a testing schedule of weekly testing, and our COVID safety manager handled sort of figuring out if people could get tested on their own, checking in on people's results and whether they had managed to test on their own. And then we filled the gaps with home rapid tests that we provide on site, like on the testing day every week. And symptom screeners. We were lucky enough that one of the parents of our producer happens to be the director of infection control for a hospital in Philadelphia, which I
Wow.
didn't know until we were trying to figure out what medical
Yeah.
professional could advise us on our COVID protocols. And he's like, actually, my mom does this. And I'm like, oh my God.
Well,
But
absolutely. Yeah, this is something. This is a part of the new reality of presenting Shakespeare in New York. Is that not only do you have to be, a great theater practitioner, which you've all had your training over the past many years that you've been doing this all, but in the past year and a half to 2 years, we've all had to become film and TV producers in terms of presenting
yeah,
things in the virtual realm. And now many of us have to become experts in handling COVID and
freelance
handling
medical
Yeah.
uh,
professional.
freelance medical professionals where you're doing testing. So there's a lot of additional balls to juggle in the process of putting together a show. Liz, you mentioned that the audience and their reaction was the easiest part of it. What were some of the challenges that you faced in mounting this production?
Well, the exchange and I personally had never done a full production entirely outdoors before, and there's just a learning curve and a lot to contend with when you're performing in public locations. You know, we weren't in the Delacorte. We weren't in an outdoor theater. We were in public parks. And so there are more New Yorkers have jet skis than you might realize, for example, and jet skis are very loud. Also,
They are loud.
joggers are very insistent on the path that they are going to jog, even if it is directly through an acting space where a play is clearly taking place. Right. So there are just things like that that you have to take into account. And sound was a big issue in terms of miking and in terms of Cosette pinned an incredible sound design, and we had to make sure it was audible. And so just sometimes there were snafus, either a New Yorker who was not thrilled about their Shakespeare being there, making his presence known, or just
interrupting their outdoor space.
Yeah, interrupting their drinking schedule, right. or just sound or whatever. Basically anytime.
Oh, Liz might have frozen just a little bit.
Liz froze a bit. So while we wait for her to come back,
but I would maybe just jump in and kind of say the same thing. Like it makes you realize that, you know, what all of us who live in New York realize: when you're living on top of each other in a city like New York, everybody is very protective of their space and their right to that space. So it is this kind of sharing of space with the people who didn't know there was going to be a Shakespeare production in their space. Right. And some are happily surprised and some are less happily surprised. And so we try to just find harmony as best we can, and understanding with the people who are also using the space for what they want to. But we had quite a few happily surprised people.
Well, that's what we're hoping for. Back? Let's try to get her back. Let's see if we can invite her to come back on. I don't see her in my list of people to pull up. So I don't know if that's going to be possible, but
back in.
We'll keep an eye on it. Well, anyway, we're going to be wrapping up in just a moment. So, Cristina, I'll just throw this kind of final question to you. Now that you do have this full outdoor production under your belt, as one of the heads of the Shakespeare Exchange, what is coming up next for you folks? Is it more full-length productions? Is it a return to some of the other things you were speaking about early on?
It takes a lot of runway to get to a full production, whether it's outdoor or indoor, and the budgetary runway necessary for that, and the planning. And as we've also known, like from our experience producing in theater venues, getting a reservation on an available space is also something that can be 12 to 18 months in the snatching. Right. So there's a lot of elements.
Current era.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements involved in a runway to another full production. So I will say I'm pretty sure that is in our future. I'm just hard-pressed to say at what point in our future right now. But I know that the virtual versions of the Freestyle Labs I mentioned, or the virtual one that will be coming up, I imagine sometime in the next month and a half to look out for that, probably sometime in November. We're pretty close to setting a date for that, I think, and being able to market that more directly. We also have a wonderful project that is on our website that was launched in 2020 called the Voices Project. That's a project. Hi, Liz! Yay!
Hi. My phone got too warm.
Yes.
Sorry.
But that's another thing I didn't really go into describing, but I invite people to also go on our website, which is NYSX.org. And there's a place that talks about Freestyle Labs, about ShakesBEER, about Sonnet Project, about all these things. And the Voices Project is one of those things. And they're actor-created videos where actors who are members of identity groups that are traditionally underrepresented in classical theater and theater in general. So BIPOC artists, trans and gender nonconforming artists, disabled artists. We're gradually building out the catalog of those videos, but we want to give not just a platform for the performances of those artists, but also invite them to show us the resonances of Shakespeare for them personally. So the videos are a speech of Shakespeare of the actor's choice and a second piece of text of the actor's choice that has some relationship that talks back to that initial piece from their perspective. So that's something I encourage people to check out that lives entirely online on our website. And Liz, is there anything you wanted to say that you were cut off by technology from finishing up.
I don't know what the last thing you heard from me was.
You were kind of talking about the sharing space with other New Yorkers who are dead set on having a plan for their night that didn't include Shakespeare. Some are happy to have us, and some are less so.
Well, I was trying to say our audiences never seemed to mind, even when we
No.
thought that, oh no, this is going to impact the audience's experience. Just across the board, audiences seemed so happy to be there and so appreciative of what our actors were doing and the fact that we were doing this show. I was just honestly blown away by how game everyone was to sit on the ground and watch us do Winter's Tale for 2.5 hours as the light completely changed. And people seemed really happy about it.
Well, listen.
And if I could just say, based on something you asked the previous interviewee about how do you sell Shakespeare to people who maybe like Shakespeare? I don't know about that. It was really, first of all, I was just really touched by how many little kids, particularly I wasn't as present at the shows in Inwood Hill Park, but at Pier 46, who just were so intrigued and coming up and wanting to see what was going on and everything, and people who brought their kids there. But then even one night, the security guard that we had hired to help us out at the venue, I was talking to him after being with us for the first night he was with us. And I was like, do you like Shakespeare? He's like, not really. And he's like, but I liked yours. I really liked it.
Carlos.
That's great.
And Carlos. And that is something that I'm proud on behalf of the company to say we have gotten a lot of over our time since being founded in 2010, and that is probably the greatest compliment that we cherish, is when people are saying, I didn't think I liked this, but I love it when you guys do it.
Well, one of my favorite things about the Exchange... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
One of my favorite things about the Exchange that I fell for in the beginning when I was doing a couple pub crawls was that everyone who does shows really cares about the text and really wants to have fun and sees no contradiction between the two. Like, we're going to do Shakespeare and do it right, and that's going to be we're going to have so much fun doing it.
We don't think we need to make it into something that's not. We just think we need to show you what it is.
Exactly.
And that's what it's all about. It's about whatever form of Shakespeare you're doing, whether you're doing the plays, the sonnets, whatever. It's about making it approachable and something that the audience can engage in, whatever their experience level is, and something that gets them deeper into Shakespeare. They want to see more. They want to see more of your company. They want to see more Shakespeare, more productions, more of the romances, more of the whatever. So that you're on the right track. If you're having that reaction from the audience, then you're doing your job well. You mentioned your website is NYSX.com, correct?
.org.
.org, pardon me. All right, so I urge you guys, check out the New York Shakespeare Exchange. Cristina Lundy, Liz Thaler, we thank you both for lending us your time here tonight. I know you're coming off the big production, and there's a lot to sort out after that. But I thank you for joining us, and I wish you all the best. Audience, check them out. Check out their website. It's a wonderful group, and they have plenty of exciting things coming up. Thank you both. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks so much.
Okay, we will bid farewell to Liz and to Cristina, and we will ask our next interviewee of the evening to join us. We're getting a lot of love from the audience. If you're enjoying what you're seeing, send us your smiles, your waves, your thumbs up, your hearts, anything that any questions you have for the people that you've seen thus far, for me or